Good evening, and welcome to this event, this talk, dialogue, and evening. To be African in racial and cultural heritage, yet European, American, Caribbean, Australian, Indian, or other non-African places in nationality is to navigate the tightrope of identity and belonging in the place one has chosen or has been forced to call home. This is a quote from one of my close friends, Tapiwa Matsinde, who is a writer, storyteller, curator, and mentor, who lives in the UK but comes from Zimbabwe. When I saw the theme for this year's Black History Month, which is Diaspora Dialogues, this quote came into my mind. And it is a pleasure, it is an honor to collaborate with Black History Month. I would like to thank Michelle and her team for all the work that they put in. It takes a lot of time, research, perseverance, but most importantly, a big dose of stubbornness. Because to curate Black History Month in the times that we live in is not an easy job. My name is Eunice Nanzala Schumacher. I currently work at the National Museum, National Musea, and I'm a curator for public and education and public experience. And currently I'm working on an exhibition, a solo exhibition that will be opening in November. Anawana Haloba, I want to tell you something. I will see it, I know, which is a solo exhibition about the artist Anawana Haloba, Zambian Norwegian. She works in both contexts. And please, 13th of November, it opens and runs until April. But I have a background in architecture and design, and I am the founder of My African Aesthetic, the organization that is collaborating with Black History Month for this talk and another talk that we will have at the end of the month. Today we are honored to have three fantastic people here who will help us start this conversation. When Michelle and I talked about how My African Aesthetic could contribute, she told me this whole part of design and architecture, we haven't explored so much the Black experience, the African experience, and the African diasporan experience in relation to these disciplines. And she contacted me and I said, we could start somewhere. So this is a start. And I'm so grateful that T. Michael, Don Lawrence, and Henry said yes to this talk. Today's theme, I have to look a little bit so I don't talk too much. I will briefly introduce our guests, and there is more about them on our page. But Don Lawrence is an architect whose life bridges Jamaica, New York, and Oslo, each place shaping how he thinks about design, culture, and belonging. Educated at the Cooper Union in New York and the Oslo School of Architecture and Design, he founded Don Lawrence Architect RS in 2013. His practice has since developed a body of work that explores how architecture can carry memory, identity, and landscape into dialogue with contemporary life. Don Lawrence brings a perspective shaped by his own lived experience across the global north, but also recently his work now in the global south. What Mugendi Mtarara, one of the leading industrial designers on the African continent, calls the global majority, not the global south. He approaches architecture, Don Lawrence approaches architecture not just as shelter or symbol, but as a living conversation between the past, the future, nature and culture, African aesthetics, and global discourse. Through his practice, writing, and teaching, he invites audiences to see architecture as a vessel of connection. Michael. T. Michael. We're very glad to have you here too. And when I when I discovered, now I'm sounding like an explorer. When I discovered, when I discovered T. Michael's work, I was amazed and a little bit embarrassed that I wasn't well versed with his work. Now, in retrospect, knowing how much of an influence and an inspiration he is to many, many designers here in Oslo, in Norway, but also internationally. T. Michael is a multidisciplinary Ghanaian-Norwegian artist based in Bergen, the western coastal city of Norway. His creative work comprises his label, Norwegian Rain, T Kimono, Film Lab, short films, and T Creative Spaces. Internationally acclaimed, and that is not just for saying, it is a fact. His conceptual approach to men's tailoring seamlessly blends tradition with innovation across multiple creative platforms. And at the heart of his work is a deep reverence for sartorial traditions filtered through a lens that celebrates cultural diversity and contemporary narratives. Please visit his flagship store here in Oslo at Bjørvika, and you will testify to what I just said. As a co-founder, strategist, and designer at Norwegian Rain, T. Michael redefines functional fashion by transforming rainwear into elegant, high-performance outerwear. Each piece combines advanced weather technology with refined aesthetics as a response to the dramatic climate of Bergen, where it rains 2 out of 3 days a year. So I'm going to try to summarize. And lastly, but not last but not least, isn't that what people say? Henry. Henry is a board member here at My African Aesthetic. He's been with us from the start of the journey, and he's a researcher and a professor at OsloMet. A lot of years of research behind him at also the Oslo School of Architecture, in design, in communication, and also in, I think, social sciences, the background in social sciences. So I would like to introduce them, and the theme for today, you found it on the internet, but we would like to find this. Just a minute. So I would like to. I think I've introduced all three. Yeah. Yes, I have. Yeah. Yes, I have. Yeah, I have. So without taking up most of your time right now, I would like to welcome Henry to take over and help us unpack how African aesthetics can impact the global discourse in academia, in design and architecture practice, and generally in everyday life, also in the diaspora. Thank you very much.
Hello? Does it work? Yeah. Yes, thanks. Thanks, Eunice, for the introduction. So I'm going to play the role in this conversation of the person that's asking questions. And I'm very, very delighted to be able to the position where I'll be asking Dawn and Michael about their work and about their ideas about African aesthetics. So I want to say a little bit about my inspiration or my starting point for participating in this discussion. So I am not a designer, but I have, in an academic setting, worked a lot with designers, architects, urbanists, fashion designers, and other artists. And my starting point is, there's this, I'm sure what I'm going to say is nothing new, but there's this paradox when it regards to the place of Africa in several our academic disciplines I have been encountering. That in general, there's a general idea about Africa as a place that has very little to contribute to discussions in many of the disciplines, several disciplines. But at the same time, when you look at both the theoretical concepts, the ideas, you would find a lot of those that have origins in Africa, but are not recognized. So, for example, a concept like fetishism, it's presented to seem as if it has nothing to do with that other practice that's called something else, that is not quite new, but has been practiced over centuries in different forms, but has been called something else. Another concept like animism. You see now in design circles, it's become very popular in discussions about sustainability and about the environment and about the need to think differently about how we relate to not human beings relate to non-human things. So it's those discussions and those debates are not new, but that really exists. That kind of really my starting point for kind of engaging in this discussion with Don and Michael. So and there's also among many people believe that when you look at the future, when we think about challenges to the different challenges that we face as a planet today, challenges about the environment, about sustainability, about ways of living, that Africa represents like an excellent laboratory for developing new ideas, for thinking differently. So that's my starting point. That's what inspires me. But I want to go a bit from those big ideas and come down a bit down to earth because I want to start a discussion with Don and Michael. And the first question I wanted to ask is, I want to get both of you to tell us a bit about what the story of you becoming a designer. How did it come about, and what were inspirations? Don, you may start.
Yeah, I can start. Mm-hmm. No, that's an interesting question because I've always been a creative. It is what gave me my attention when I was a kid. I could draw a lot, and I just felt it was the natural path to get into art or into architecture, something creative. And throughout my experience in my academic years, it was such that I was good at these things, and just be talking to my elders, they said, okay, well, why don't you go into architecture? And it felt natural. But it's been a long story. But I ended up, I started in Jamaica and got really interested into architecture because I saw the elder, the guys that were a couple of years ahead of me, they were carrying around T-squares and they look really cool. And I thought, well, maybe I should do that too. So it started out in a kind of a surfaceoidal way, but it led me down the rabbit hole to architecture, and eventually migrating to New York and going to architecture school there. So then it just blossomed into a career.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, Michael, did your encounter with tailoring or fashion design start that early?
Well, yes and no. I suppose I've always been interested in dressing up, and I think for me, clothing was something that it was sort of a form of expressing myself in a way. It's always been there since I was very, very young. And in a way, it wasn't the making of the clothing that was important. It was the wearing of the clothing that was important. But then, when you're a certain size, there's a few challenges, right? So the jeans would be too long, the shirt would be too wide. So you need to adapt them, right? So then you pull up the sewing machine and then you box it up and then you wear it and then you feel the vibe, right? And that's how we started out. But it wasn't very serious. And then when I moved to London, it became a little bit more serious because I would see all these beautiful stores and I would see all this wonderful clothing with all these things that I couldn't afford, right? So you save all your money and then you go and buy one piece and you feel so good about it. On Friday you wear it, you wear it on Saturday. And there was a certain magical feeling of having those clothing on. Today, I understand it differently. I understand how and why those things were there. It's a form of placing yourself on the map. Is a form of resistance. Is a form of anything else you want to call it. But it was a way that I could see myself in the way that I wanted to see myself, right? But then when I was making these clothes for myself and for other people. It wasn't very serious. But when I moved to Norway in 1989, I realized that in this city called Bergen, there's no one that's going to give me those clothing, and there's no one that's going to give me the opportunity to work with that kind of work. So I need to create this myself, right? So I bought secondhand clothing. I was ripping them apart, wanted to see how it was done on the inside. My ex-mother-in-law gave me a sewing machine. I started playing around with it again, and that old feeling came back, And then finally, I enrolled in the tailoring school and did a course for 4 years, and I've never looked back ever since. It felt so right to now make the clothing that I wanted to wear. It was a reflection of myself in my head. I didn't have to adapt it. I didn't have to tweak it. It was exactly as I wanted it. But yeah, there's something about learning the foundations of clothing, because I didn't want to be a designer per se. I wanted to understand how to make the clothing that I wanted. So in a very sort of humble but very persistent and very directional sort of way, I ended up being a designer or a creative.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And particularly the last point you were making about learning the foundations of the discipline profession. And it's and I've seen there's this tension in the way you talk about your work and the way your work appears. And both Michael and Don, I think this is a common challenge in these design disciplines. How you negotiate the kind of the tension between tradition and the traditional canons of a profession, and how you move beyond that and to create your own persona, your own identity within your craft. And we have seen. I mean, if you look at your work and both of your work, you see like the signs of how you're navigating between that. So we can look at, for example, at how you draw on traditions, for example, African traditions in from northern Ghana, the Batakali,
Correct.
Colorful traditional garment that you use by royals in northern Ghana, and then you interpret it and to kind of in the form of a garment that is dark, made of linen. And
that's a very important point.
Yes. So how you navigate that? So I think it's a very
I'm just going to jump on that very quickly, because of course I started out making suits, and over the years I've evolved into making other things, plaza suits as well. But I think what one realizes very quickly is that we are all being taught certain things. We all been, I wouldn't use the word indoctrinated, but we all been given certain information of how to look at things. We define things by what we've seen from before and how we look at it further on. And then you can call it tradition, because that's passed down, and then you take that. But the point is that when I took the Batakari and I sort of deconstructed it, took the seams away from the side, and I flushed all the color out, the first thing that most people tell me is that's very Japanese, right? And again, it tells you exactly how we see things, right? Because the void of color is Asian, right? When we talk about muted tones, it's Scandinavian. When we talk about bright, vivid colors, is African. Generally, that's how we look at things, you know. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. That's what it is. So the whole idea is, for me, is to start playing with these ideas and see how long it will take for someone to catch on to that. It's a nice, beautiful joke for me. Right? Because I wear muted clothing. I wear a lot of black stuff. Sometimes I wear a bit of color, but very rarely I wear color. Not because I don't like it, it's just because it's easier for me in the morning, just pick up one thing from the wardrobe that matches everything and I'm out, you know, done. But then when I understood how we see color, it changes so much of how your work is done and how much you present and the response you get back. It's such a beautiful journey, actually.
Such a beautiful statement that you make about, you embody all that within just that concept. I find very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And Don, so I found something similar in your practice, and especially when I was looking at your project in Bali, and how you kind of emphasize the need to kind of study the traditions of building techniques, for example, the use of the techniques of building of traditional Balinese break and birds. You can also you take other ideas from African building techniques and merge them together to become something new, but that's something is connected to that tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's important, and that's one of the things that you learn when working in two different regions. You know, the global majority and the global north, right? So, of course, the most obvious thing is the climate, but it's not just the climate. There's the climate and the culture. They are connected. You can't separate one from the other. But what I think about, there's someone said this really, I don't know who said it. It's an interesting definition of architecture. That architecture is a concretization of our society, of our values, how we see ourselves, what we appreciate, how we relate to each other in a civil society, right? It concretizes that. And the way I like to think about it is that, you know, if you've seen these big ant nests, right, where they pour molten rock, molten concrete or metal in there, and they take it out, and you see this negative structure that represents how that whole, the canals and all of that is. If someone were supposed to do that to us, not hopefully not, an alien civilization were to come here, we are devoid of human beings, and they were to come and inspect, you know, just the buildings, the very stuff of you know, concrete and materials. They could tell a lot about us, right? They would tell what is civic buildings, what is hospitals, schools, the placements of those rooms, why is that room there and why is that room not there. They could tell a lot of information about us just by the empty cavities of the spaces that we inhabit right now, right? So in a way, the way I think about architecture is that it's capturing a fleeting moment in our culture. And not only architecture, right? There's fashion, there's design, there's dance, there's music. Is that we have a living thing called culture. It's alive, and I always wonder about that word culture, right? Because when I thought about culture, and then people also mention like culture in terms of bacteria, right? Yeah. And I was like, are these two things connected? Right?
Very much so.
And they are very much so, right? They're alive. Yeah. You think of bacteria, they're multiplying, they're growing, it's movement, it's this little, and culture is also something alive it's never stand still. And what we do as creatives is that we try to capture this fleeting, intangible thing, a snapshot of it, right? And that becomes our work, whether it's fashion, it's architecture, dance, music. It's trying to capture this, the zeitgeist of that fleeting, moving, developing, organic thing. And so to come back to Bali, right? Your original question is that there is a culture in Bali, and to design there, it requires an investigation and understanding of that culture in order to truly express and build an architecture there that is reflective of that time, that place, that culture. And that was a journey that started in 2018 with many different revisions. But what happens there as a designer is that it changes me, and I in some way hope to change it a little bit. Yes. But it's a journey of understanding a culture and trying to capture that understanding of I have it in my development as an architect, and what you see there, those bricks and all those things, it's a reflection of where I am right now as a person, yes. As a designer, as an architect, and my understanding of Bali and Indonesia.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I'd like to comment on something you said, because I wrote something on a fleet dog, right?
Yeah.
and in a way, it's let's see if I can find this thing here. It's actually quite funny how we sort of end up in the same. So there's a few words, but I wrote, to see things through a socio-political lens to create the spaces around us, right? And the objects that inhabit these spaces. And then culture is everything. Culture is complex. It's not innate. It's learned and it's experienced. Tradition are rituals that are passed on. And practically, tradition is always the departure point. The end goal is to create a cultural movement that blurs boundaries and creates discourses, and fertile ground that stimulates new impulses for teaching, research, and creative practices. Practically, it's a cultural diversity is present in our zeitgeist. And these are, it doesn't matter what you do, these are supposed to be the guidelines in a way, because we cannot live in a vacuum, right? We live in spaces that are affected by so many different things. When I go to Ghana and I see things over there, it affects me in different ways. It brings out a calculated response in a way based on that. And that thing cannot be transported and placed here because it wouldn't work as it is, But it's all about blurring the boundaries and making, like I said, snapshots of those experiences, and that would, again, spur on new ideas. Sounds a lot of words put together, but the point is you feel this thing inside you, and that's where the energy starts. The energy starts from the inside. You start questioning yourself. You start questioning everything you see. People are telling you this is how it's supposed to be. You're like, no, I don't see that in my head, right? What I see is based on X, Y, Z, my experiences, my ambitions, my fantasies, and everything else. So the point of creativity is to distill all this into a product, a feeling, a space that hopefully will give the user a little bit of what you thought about. And if it doesn't give them that, we need to go back to the drawing board and start again. But it's not a finished product. It's just ongoing. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Yeah. To follow up what you were just talking about, Michael and Don, previously. So as you were talking, I was thinking about the importance of representation in culture, because culture is basically the stories we tell about ourselves and the things we do and the meaning of the things that we have around us. So I don't know whether you have some thoughts about the importance of how you frame and portray what you do, or whether there you find like challenges or difficulties when it comes to getting, especially if you're doing things in so many different contexts, Europe, Asia, Africa, whether it's difficult to represent what you do so that people kind of understand the essence.
I don't think it's difficult at all. I think it's super easy. Easy because, first of all, you need to know who you are. You need to understand what you stand for. And when you've understood that, then practically you don't change what you do depending on where you go. You know, it's the same person, the same ideas, the same thoughts. I say if you diminish yourself and go into a room, the moment you start bringing yourself back to where you're supposed to be, it means you're rebelling against that room. No one is going to like you in that room. No. Because this is not who you were when you came into the room. So it's important to enter the room as you are, the person you are. The moment you do that, people would have this emotional attachment to the person you are first. I talked about this, at the back. And the moment they have this emotional attachment, then your work becomes easier to understand. Because even though your work, carries a certain traditional foundation, it spirals on and goes into different directions based off all the things that, make you up, So I cannot look at my work as just Ghanaian. I cannot look at my work as just Norwegian. I can't look at my work as whatever I am. I am a combination of all these places that I've been to, all the people that I've seen, all the conversations that I've had. And I suppose every time you go into a space, it's a privilege to be in that space. That's number one. So one, you pick up all the great things about it, space, and all the things that are not great, you just bury them. Because otherwise you'll be spending too much of your time fighting these instead of creating that, right? So it's a fine balance of saying, I don't like this, but if you spend too much time complaining about that, it means you're actually not creating new variables and new spaces for people to see what it could be, right? So much important, for me anyway, to go to places, faraway places like Japan, build a connection with the people, understand what I like about the area. If there's something I don't like, it's not my business. It's not mine to complain. It's mine to not just siphon, but add something to whatever is there, and hopefully we can blur those boundaries and create new variables. So I am Ghanaian, yes. I'm African. I'm Norwegian. I'm a short black guy with white hair. I make clothing. I do all of that. It's all part of the same thing. You can't take anyone away from them, Okay. And that's what I think is magical when you meet people. When you meet people and they are themselves, you don't have to like them 100%, but this is it, And at any time you meet them, you're going to get the same version of that person, and then you learn to use your equalizer, right? So you take away the noise that you don't like, and you put out the best parts of them. That's how we create communities.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So, but I like the way in which you're thinking, the kind of freedom which you approach what you do. But at the same time, I'm saying because I know that both of you were trained, or partly fully trained in your professions in Europe and in North America. And in these educational systems, they have certain ideas about what is valuable, what is excellence, and what is the norm, and what is as the norm. So if you listen to both of you and how you work, I wonder whether there's, I don't know, is this how much of what you trained relevant to what you do, and how much do you have to challenge it in order to kind of go the places I want to go?
Yeah, I'll start with when I studied at the Cooper Union in New York, right? For those of you who don't know the Cooper Union, it's like a spectacularly different place from the rest of university life in America. First of all, it's free. Every student that gets there gets 100% full tuition scholarship. And it's a very special place. It's a small school taught by renowned architects. And I came from a kind of a working class Jamaican family. I was moved to New York in 1989, 17, and went into Cooper Union in 1993. So I was still Jamaican in my thought. I'm still Jamaican now, but I was more so Jamaican than anything else, and very, very conservative. I mean, Jamaica doesn't have that conservative. When people think of Jamaica, they think of weed and rastas and everybody's living free. But if you come from Kingston, it's a very Christian conservative society, and that was my frame of mind coming into America. And what I wanted to do was, I wanted to be an architect. I had this vision since I was maybe 12, 13 that I would be an architect. So I came to Cooper Union, and they had a dean called John Haydock, and he was a world-renowned architect, and more so a world-renowned educator. And he has a very clear vision of how architects should be educated. You should look within yourself. And at 23, 24 back then, I was an idiot. Right? I came from being a teenager. I thought, okay, now I'm not in the teens anymore. I'm 20, so I'm I'm still a teenager, right? So I was like, no, I don't want to look into myself. I want to be an architect. It makes sense, right? Like I go to architecture school. I want to learn how to design buildings. Like, no, you're going to look in yourself and find yourself. And there came this barrier of resistance. Like, the more you tell me to look in myself, the more I don't want to do that. And so that was the story of architecture school over the 5-year period of me resisting that call to look into yourself. And by the way, that's the advice I would give to myself and to any young person. But the thing is, even though I was doing that, right, outwardly and consciously, saying, no, I don't want to do that. I want to study architecture. I want to design buildings. There was that constant force telling me, you look inside of yourself. So what happened was in my subconscious, I was searching, like, what the hell does that mean anyway? Look into yourself. I mean, I know myself. I mean, what kind of a question is that? Right? And it's still a kind of a puzzling question, to be honest. But I started doing that at some level, and for me that meant looking back towards my culture, because what was happening parallel at that time was that I was learning philosophy and history, and it was Western philosophy, Western theories and history. More particularly, it was male Western philosophy and history, right? It was quite specific, Aristotle, Kant, you name all these philosophers. And the histories that you were learning was also Western history. So, and for me, I'm thinking, well, what about my history? And I thought back to Jamaica, and what philosophers, what historian, what theory, what is the history of Jamaica? What is the history? And Jamaica has a truncated history in a way. There were people taken from Africa and brought to this little island, and we were separated from our history for 500 years. And the first book I found was A History of Jamaica. It was written by a British guy in England. But that's what I could. I didn't have the internet wasn't so available like that, so you had to find books. That's what I found, and okay, but it still was lacking because I didn't. It talks about history, and yeah, I learned something, but I was looking for what. Isn't there African philosophers and African histories and African ideas that was truly African that I could connect to in terms of my culture, at least my ethnic culture, and I didn't find it, and it became an unanswered question, and what happened as I left that school and finished and everything, it's all packaged up. What I felt was that that unanswered question kind of behaved as a kind of a trauma. When soldiers go to war, or whenever you go through any traumatic experience, you go through it, you put on a good posture, you fight through it, do what you have to do, and then you get behind that catastrophic event. And then comes that period where you have to process that, right? So in a way, it's not a trauma, but it behaves like that, right? So there is this unanswered question. I finished, I got my degree, but this unanswered question, in a way, it drives my career, it drives who I am, in the background, trying to figure out what this is, right? So in a way, me being right here today answering these questions, I feel like you're the psychologist and I'm in this chair trying to figure this out. But in a way, I'm here trying to answer that question now, right? Who am I in terms of my cultural heritage? For the first time, I went on the continent of Africa earlier this year. I went to Zambia, and that was a kind of spiritual experience to kind of be there and to see the uncanny resemblance between the culture in Jamaica and the culture in Zambia, right? One of the kind of the very interesting experience I had there was I went to a lecture by the director of the National Museum in not Lukasa but Livingston, this woman named Victoria, I forgot her last name, but she presented a really fascinating presentation of the transformation of African or Zambian traditional ceremonies and the costumes that they had there, and how corporate interest and political interest have transformed the costumes, right? And what she presented was there is this costume where, I don't know if you close your eyes and imagine it, there's like many different layers of colors. Like it's like a pantsuit with many different layers of colors, and they're wearing a mask and they're dancing in this. And she was saying that the colors there were, because she's at the National Museum there, the colors were more muted. They were earthy tones. They were not so vivid. And she was saying that today they're using Western colors, right? They're much more vivid, and they're not, sustainably sourced, et cetera, et cetera. And she said it basically was a perversion of the national or the ceremony, and one can debate that. The other thing she pointed out was how Western thought has kind of taught Zambians that the idea of doing these ceremonies topless, both men and women were topless, and you should be ashamed to show the bare breast, and now they have to be covered in T-shirts, And conveniently, those T-shirts carries the logos of the sponsors, right? But it was really fascinating because of all the different topics that it's covering. But what was also fascinating for me being there was that in Jamaica, in our independence, we have these dancers called the Junkunu. The Junkunus, they wear the same exact costume, separated by 500 years of slavery and forbidding, you're forbidden to have any oral tradition or anything. But somehow that survived, right? That survived, and it's so uncannily similar. Almost the same everything. And so that for me was a kind of like an aha moment to see how things like that connect. And so for me, kind of, I'm always having this really long, circuitous ways to answer your question. But coming back to your question about how that my education is influenced. So there's this unanswered question constantly running in the background, trying to connect those pieces. And so I think it's really interesting sitting here today trying to connect Africa and Jamaica as part of that question, right? And seeing all those similarities and how they connect together, and in a way, it answers those questions for me personally, and it guides this long self-discovery process that I call my career. Let's leave it at that.
Wow. I'm sorry I got so carried away by saying that. I got lost. I was kind of that I'm the person that was supposed to be like asking the question. I became part of the audience. So fascinating because it touched so many things. What you're saying about recognizing the kind of the similarities across different African and diaspora, I think. It reminds me of what Emile Césaire said once when he visited Senegal, and it was like he heard the drums were playing in the traditional ceremony, and he really got like this that it was so resembled the drums that he hears when they're playing during the carnival in Martinique. So it's like there's also a story about how these influences travel. How sometimes even when they travel, they actually remain more in the purer form in the diaspora than actually where where they originally from. But also how they change.
Right.
Yeah. So it just kind of leads us to this more broader topic about. That's also the thing that Eunice and I kind of try to bring up in the podcast about African aesthetics. So the question that we always try to ask, I guess, is like whether in their disciplines they believe that there exists something like an African aesthetics that is beyond the personal identities of the people that are practicing the domain, whether it's fashion, whether it's architecture, whether it's design. I don't know whether, Michael, you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, that's a big one.
Something like this, and how would it look like, and where would I go to see the signs of them, just like that, when things about garment making, about textiles, and about things like that.
I think that maybe the departure point is that many years ago, every garment in Ghana was made by hand, right? Every garment was dyed by hand and stitched together by hand. Many years ago, that was an innovation, right? So most of the things that we talk about as tradition today, at some point, was an innovation, right? And innovation is what moves these things forward. Now, obviously, since things take time to make, you can understand that people reserved these beautiful clothing that they've made for special occasions, right? because you can't just wear it out, because obviously it's going to take you years to finish that, or someone is going to have to pay someone to do it. So there's a certain pride in wearing these garments, right? And then when you start talking about pride, I think that's when you can understand how clothing transforms people, right? And then you have the different dyeing techniques. You mentioned briefly that the colors were more muted, right? And it makes sense because those were more natural dyes. It came from plants, it came from the soil, it came from different shrubs. So the colors were different than the vivid ones that we have today, right? You can talk about indigo in Japan, which we have the same thing in Nigeria, you know, the same indigo vats where you dip dye and then it oxidizes and the colors become vivid. What I'm driving at is that the way you carry yourself has a lot to do with the way, one, affluence has a lot to play in there as well. That's one. Number two, pride. Number three, whether hierarchy as well. You know, so all these things play parts in it. But what I know for sure is that people are very sort of resourceful. So from the small little things they'll have, they'll make it grand, you know. And that grandness is the basis of most cultures anyway, that grandness. So if you go back in time and then you go pre-industrial revolution, you will look at many, many cultures in the world, from the Far East to the East to India, Japan, Scandinavia. The clothing were very much powerful in their outlook. Everyday clothing, there's not much of documentation. There is obviously, but when people dress up, that's when we start talking about clothing, because then it's not just for covering up, but it's for saying something.
Yeah.
I think we still have the same thing today. I think clothing is very, very important. We don't think much about it sometimes, and people say, oh, I don't really care much about clothing, but that's also a standpoint. That's also a statement. That's also actually making a statement to say, I'm trying to rid myself of that, right? And obviously, you know, I live off making clothing, so I wish everyone likes clothing, you know. But in a way, I want to make clothing such that I want to create it such that you don't have to buy a new one tomorrow. You know, there's a certain understanding that if you come to me and I make something for you, you have it for the next 20 years, as long as you keep the shape you have. And if you don't, you come back to your tailor, because we make ample space in the clothing so you can ease it out, you know. And you know, there's a great story. This guy sent me a picture on the 17th of May. He bought a suit from me 23 years ago. His son was wearing it for 17th of May, and he felt so proud. He sent me the picture of his son wearing it, right? And these are small little things that, you know, puts a little bit of dust in your eye, you know. It's beautiful, and I think that's the essence of the what clothing means to people, right? And I know for a fact, you know, my dad would go to the office, who wear suits to go to the office. And when the weekend comes and there was a special occasion, he would put on his regalia, you know, the long robes. And there was a certain pride when he put that on, right? And I was just texting with my sister as well about, because when I was young, I remember there was a word that we used to call kolo, right? Kolo is a short form of colonization, right? Now, this is even very interesting because kolo in those days means old-fashioned clothing. Clothing that were passé, right?
Yeah.
So when you wear something, people say, oh, that's kolo. You know, right? But I didn't remember it very well now, so I texted her just to find out if it's because, in a way, it's the opposite of what we think things were, right? So that was very interesting to get that. You know, I'm going to dig deep into that later on. But I've been running in circles as well. I don't know if I answered your question.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful circle.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask the same question to you, Don, about African aesthetics in architecture, given the fact that there's so much there's so much diversity, the types of building traditions, techniques, whether you're from the southern Zimbabwe to the Sahelan region of Mali to the coastal regions where there's a lot of use of bamboo and things like that. So bamboo, stone, clay and things like that. There's so much differences. But at the same time, there's so much communication across these different different systems of creation. So, I mean, the question is kind of, I know it's a provocative one, it's intend to be there. So,
Yeah.
so what do you think about?
Well, I probably reflect a provocating answer. Yes. Because maybe it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And let me explain. So when I think of, let's say, the African influence on Western architecture and vice versa, I would say, because one looks at the architecture that, let's say, modern architecture, not talking about the classic stuff way back, but I'm talking about modern architecture, new buildings going up today. We think of this as Western architecture, a purely Western construct. And I disagree. I think, not I think, but I know that the founders of, or the guys who got credit for calling the fathers, I'm deliberately ear quoting fathers, of Western architecture. We're talking about Le Corbusier and not just architecture, art, Matisse, Picasso. They were heavily influenced by what they call African architecture or African art. They were looking at African ceremonial objects and painting them and reinterpreting them in their artwork and in their architecture. And I think it's quite coincidental that that kind of happened around the time right after the Industrial Revolution, right? Because the Industrial Revolution was, what inspired. If you read Le Corbusier, he wanted to go away with the old way of doing architecture, like the way. Before, in the 1800s, if you want to be a great architect, you go to France and you study the Beaux-Arts architecture, you study the Greek columns and, Palladio and all of these Western canons of architecture. But then once the Industrial Revolution came, it was like, we're going to do things that is purely functional, right? We're going to act on the spirit of how the airplane came into be. It became a very structured problem. If we want to fly, we have to create a wing section where there's more pressure on the bottom than on the top, and therefore you have to put enough speed behind it, and that's the problem. How can we solve that? And you just throw everything at it until you come to a solution, right? And if you can take that principle and apply it to architecture, right? What is needed? What technology we have available to make a functional space, and it looked completely different than whatever came before. And it's quite interesting that the influence of African architecture and African design kind of collided with Western architecture around that time. I'm going to step back a little bit. Because when I close my eyes and I think of African architecture, I think of like brute innovation, brute functionalism, brute, like in Jamaica, when kids wanted to make toys, they found a box, they poke wheels in it, they take the cover off the bottle and they stick a stick through it, and they made a truck. And you see it's a milk carton with wheels, and they put a string, and they're having so much fun with that thing, right? And I got like a car from, a toy car from the United States, and I'm like, I want that thing, right? Because you see it. It's a truck, even though it's a milk carton. It's got the logo. And it's a truck, and it's fun, right? And that's the kind of that's what I think of when I think of African architecture. It's just brute innovation, finding, using found objects and making and repurposing it and making it work for your life. And you can call that art. You can call that just living. You can call that just struggling. But for me, when I close my eye and think of African architecture and design, that's what I think. This practical way of solving things in a functional way. And so I found that really uncanny, coming back to what I'm saying now, how those two things colliding, the end of the Industrial Revolution and African design ceremonial object coming together and having such a profound influence on Western architecture and design. Now, would you say that the building that we are in right now is, and maybe not it's an older building, but the interior design, let's say, of this building, would you say that this is an African-inspired architectural thing? Of course. If it's Western modern architecture, then it's you can't separate the two. If you want to separate African architecture's influence on Western design, you have to take Le Corbusier out of the picture, you have to take Picasso out of the picture.
And,
right?
and assume that these two influences have
never existed.
Because they've always been in conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a muddied, muted thing. So they're intertwined, right? And once those two cultures have collided, they've been influencing each other ever since. That modern architecture came influenced by African architecture, and that comes back onto the continent, and it's got another twist on it there. It came to Norway, and Norway puts its own twist on it. We have abundant resources of wood, and we have the Scandinavian twist to it. We have Overbang, and we have all of these guys that are putting their twist on let's call it remix.
Yeah.
I think that's a cooler word, right? Yeah. Everybody's remixing it all the time. Yeah. And so I think the idea of a purely African aesthetic is maybe it's the wrong question. Yes. Because there's no purity. It's a mutated, evolving phenomenon that goes back to the idea of culture that I was talking about in the beginning.
And maybe it's got to do with the need during certain periods where groups are fighting for the right of recognition and the right to be they have their own reality, acknowledge that there's a tendency to essentialize,
right,
and to draw boundaries between us and them.
Right.
And it actually happens in both ways. What you were talking about, it reminds me about something I heard. There's this Ivorian architect called Issa Diabate. They have this they have this architectural practice in Abidjan. But he was making an observation that there's always a problem with the design of pavements. Whenever the municipal authorities in Abidjan would design pavements and reserve them for walking, after a while, people would populate it and start putting stuff to sell, and there's always stuff happening on it. And this would frustrate the authorities so much that when he would travel to Vietnam, he found actually the same exact phenomenon in Vietnamese streets. So he was asking himself, what have these two places have in common?
And that's a shame, because that's one of the things I'm learning by working with the global majority of that term, is that it's a shame that there's not more cross communication between them, because what's happening in Indonesia and what's happening in Africa, it's the same problems. Yes. It's same geopolitical problems in the Caribbean, the same exact South America. It's the same geopolitical problems, but I think it's a problem of connection, right? If you want to go to Indonesia from Zambia, you have to take a plane to the global north, and then right. But if it was such that there is more south to south collaboration, that would be would be really fascinating, I think.
Yes, and that's actually true, because what are these two different places, a place in Asia and a place in Africa, have in common? They have one thing in common: they were colonized by France. And there's this, what they have in common is this history where foreign architectural design was imposed in a context where it does not fit. And there's this content, and those authorities that have just been reproducing the same kind of system that they've learned from the past have been confronted with the same problem, where it's like the way people live and the way the cities are designed are not in match.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fascinating.
So the bottom line is the pavement and the people on it. It's not a problem.
No,
It's actually, that's how it should be.
Yes.
And we should work around it.
Work around it. Instead, design to fit the way people live, rather than imposing new kind of. And that's actually one of the kind of foundation ideas, I think, when you're talking about in relation to they need to understand the cultural context. That's why I find very, very interesting.
You know, there's a beautiful thing in Ghana, I'm sure many different countries in the tropics, is that when you get out of your yard or your house, you open the gate, you stand outside for maybe 5 minutes, someone will show up. And then they show up, and you show up. So in the next about maybe 25 minutes, like a group of people having a conversation, you don't actually book to speak to people.
Right.
You know, you just get out. And obviously this has a lot to do with the temperature. The weather has a lot to do with that. You don't just step out in Bergen in a winter's night. You know what I mean? You fucked. Mind my French. but yeah, it's so in a way there's so many things that we've taken on that changes the way we see things. But if we start thinking that Kolo is out and is old, then we start thinking new ways.
Yes, absolutely. How are we doing for time, by the way? 5 minutes. Okay. So I think we have time for one question. More question?
You can talk for 5 more minutes and then take your question.
Okay. Yes.
I hope everyone has a question.
Yeah. So I mean, what you just said, Michael, just sort of gives us a good kind of transition to talking about the future. So there are many people that think that when you think about the future challenges that we face in different disciplines, architecture, but also kind of in design discipline in general, that there's a need to look for inspiration, new inspiration, for thinking about things differently. I think both of you have, to a certain extent, always kind of integrated that in your practice. So where would you, I mean, if you think about the case of architecture, if you were advising like a young up-and-coming architect, whether in Oslo or in Kingston or in Accra, where would you be kind of telling them to look for kind of new ways of thinking?
I would actually give them the same advice that I gave to myself, to look into themselves.
Yes.
But I also think there is also a kind of a unique thing, which is also that this is perhaps more directed towards minority people, not just expat Africans or people of color, but globally. Let's say you're from the global south, and you find yourself in the majority. You find yourself a minority in a country like Norway, or vice versa. If you're from Norway or global north and you're in another context where you find yourself a minority, I think it's extremely important to let your voice be heard, because when you are in an organization and it's more or less a monolith, and you are the minority, you bring something extremely valuable to that organization, which is an opposing point of view. Even if it's wrong, it's important to share that idea so that there's more, you bring perspective to the room, and you at least bring something that people in that context have never thought about before. And if it's a truly if it's a true meritocracy and it's a good organization, that would be extremely valuable to have.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice to young people.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Michael, do you agree?
Totally. I think I did mention that you should walk into the room as you are.
Yes, yeah. I remember we were talking about it.
It's very important.
Yeah.
And like I said, if you diminish yourself to start with, you can never ever make your voice heard, because it will be practically you are rebelling to that space you're in. But if you are in the space as yourself from day one, you can give comments, you can be critical about things, you can accept things, you can enjoy things. And again, like I said, there are many great things about people itself. People are magical. Governments, organizations can't be the problem, right? So it's always important to engage with people. That emotional connection is extremely important. I travel quite a bit, right? And I know that I've worked hard to get the skills that I have, right? So I'm skillful at what I do, but that is just a small part of it. It's only maybe 20% of what happens.
Yeah.
Because if you're out there and you're having these conversations with people, you're telling people about what you do, you're engaging with them, you are finding a common ground, your name will always come up when you're not in the room. Right? And that's where the magic happens, because the magic doesn't happen when you're in the room itself. It's when you're not there and people will mention, oh, that, and that. So your skill set is important, but again, we need to connect and tell and explain and inquire and learn more, because this way we can actually have conversations that are not confrontational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful piece of wisdom.
Thank you.
Yes. So I think we can open up the floor now for questions or comments from the audience.
Okay, let me just tell everybody. When you have a question, you come up here. So you're taking
I like that.
Then we have no questions.
It's too scary. It's okay, you can do it. You have support. We're all friends. So you can come up here and ask your question.
Yes.
You're great.
We'll be throwing stones at you in a minute.
Okay, so I'm Sylvie, and I'm also an architect, and I'm educated at Aho, like you. First, a supplement story to that Norwegian architectural tradition is influenced by Africa, because, and you may know the story, but our icon, Sverre Fehn, who was my teacher, not a very good teacher, him and his friends, so it was Norberg Schulz and Mjelva, and I think maybe Østby. After the World War, there wasn't an architecture school in Norway. So what they did is they took their bicycles and all their lappesaker to mend their bicycles, and they cycled to North Africa, to Morocco. And Sverre Fehn was flabbergasted by the Berber culture. I don't know how far they got, but they were definitely Morocco. And you can see that in his architecture, I would argue. So that was to support your influence. And then 2 questions. So how the hell did you get into Cooper Union? I was rejected. And and also to you, to Michael, I have so many questions for you. But your education, your design education, was that like in Norway? Was that like
Yes, I trained in Bergen.
Okay. What,
yes.
Is that ESMOD or?
No. SMOD is design. And in those days, there was something called the skredderlinjen, right? So practically, you had tailoring all the time. And then came Reform 94 or something like that. That messed up the whole shit. Because they thought the world was moving forward, so they wanted to move the world and have all this less practical stuff and more design and computer-oriented. So the tailoring course, which we did, we had like 36 hours of tailoring every week. Yes. And that was based on cutting, basting, the old-fashioned tailoring ways. So I think we were the last group that came out. Yeah. So that's short of it.
And my
Yes, was it hard to
my
get
question,
into?
how did I get into Cooper? Actually, it's a good question because it's an interesting cautionary tale, perhaps to aspiring creatives, because Cooper Union had a outreach program to high school kids, and I was in one of the most decrepit high schools in New York City. And I'm being kind when I say decrepit because it was outright dangerous. It was a really tough high school. They didn't have an arts program, and that outreach program was kind of a lifesaver. I used to go there every Saturday, and we got taught by kids who were students at the Cooper. And the first time I applied, I got rejected. And the reason why I got rejected is because I asked one of the teachers, like, what do you think of my chances of getting in? And he said, there's like 300, 500 people applying and they select like 25. So I really don't think so. I don't think you're going to get in. So I applied like I wasn't going to get in with the statistics in mind. And then at the end of the year, I saw there was actually 4 or 5 kids from the program got in. And I was like, my God, if they can do it, then I can do it. So then the next year I applied again, like I give a damn. Like I was going to get in. Yeah. And so I applied again, and I put everything in it. And then, of course, I get in.
Yes.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
What's that?
Hello, my name is Michelle. I also have a question. I have like a pet peeve, chapesta, when it comes to history and historical representations. And the best example that I have of this is the history of jazz. And you were speaking earlier and talking about, how you can't really separate the history of world architecture from African architecture. And I don't mind that lots of countries have their own jazz history, but I do mind that they consistently erase the history and origins of jazz when they discuss and talk about their respective national histories and jazz histories. And this goes to, of course, a lot of music and dance and arts traditions, but particularly, I mention jazz because it's so prevalent and because I see the example so often. But I wondered if you could just say more about exactly that point about combating, resisting the historical erasure that has become very prevalent. And it's also relevant in terms of what you said in the introduction. There's a lot of repackaging of indigenous knowledge and traditions today as something new, from everything from cuisine and health and wellness and yoga, and I could just go on and on and on. But I want to know if we could just revisit that topic in terms of how do we reinscribe the history of Africa and the diaspora to its rightful place as originators of different kinds of cultural expressions.
It's a big one.
But you're all the one to talk about it.
Yeah, but it's a simple one, though. I think the most important thing is to learn to document what we do. It's all about documentation. So if you don't tell your story, it would diminish, it would disappear, because someone else's story will be told, right? So it doesn't matter what you do, it's important to make sure your story is being told, even if you want to, it doesn't matter what it is, even if it's just a few documents PDF pieces you put together and printed them out, it's important to have those, because at some point someone might discover that and that would give a precedence to, or understanding that that knowledge and that idea was there pre whatever is current, I think is very important. I find out, there's a lot of things that we do. Earlier on I talked about when you flash out the colors and it becomes Japanese, or you put a color on, become muted, becomes Scandinavian. Those things are also important because we all think exactly the same way. I mean, I'm not different than the next person because that's what we've been given access to. But it's time to challenge every information you get. It's time to recheck, confer, before you accept whatever is out there. But most important of all, when you create something, when you decide on an idea or a hypothesis or whatever, please put it down and document it because no one is going to do it for you. Yeah.
I can add into that because I was thinking something along the same line, more that, I mentioned earlier about culture, right, and its fluidity of culture. But I think national identity is also a constructed thing, and it's always being reinvented. I also went to a lecture in Bali of a historian there, and he was talking about how the idea of Bali, the national identity of Bali, was a Dutch construction, right? It is former colony, but it was, many countries have their national romantic period, like Norway has this, and US also has this, where they're trying to form and shape a national identity. And so I think these identities, we have to take them also for what they are. They are a thing that binds us together as human. We need, it satisfies a need for us to be all together on the same boat. But it's also a political tool, a tool of control. So I always talk about this. Like whenever I see Usain Bolt running and passing, or I hear Bob Marley singing, of course, Jamaica. But I also take it with a grain of salt. There's the Jamaica Tourist Board that is constantly putting out and reshaping and reforming the idea of Jamaica, and it's constant work, right? So to come back to your question about how these ideas of histories can be erased, it's constant work, right? You have to constantly rebuild that narrative, retell these myths, or not myths. Well, you can call them myth or whatever you want to call them, but you constantly have to reshape and market these stories for them to remain present. If you leave it alone, then it will disappear, and someone else will shape that story for you. So it's work. Yeah.
Good work.
Yes, I also want to add about in relation to the point about these histories and how you reclaim them. I think especially when you're thinking about history in relation to like pre-colonial period in Africa, the challenge is that there are forms of knowledge that are not always written. Some of it is oral. Some of it is located within objects, and which had their its own ways of being read and understood. And so to translate that into this kind of modern, this current era where it's like everything is like visual and like has to be kind of not just be written but also be made in such a way that's visually like stimulating to actually to get attention, becomes a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think that there are many people that are arguing for this point that when we think about the way in which we are struggling to deal with the current challenges that we face now, for example, when it comes to sustainability, the environment, that there is an unexplored archive within certain African systems of knowledge that would be very useful in terms of assessing that, and that it would be necessary to visit that. And that, I think that's the hope, the element of hope that I have in me, because it's like we have to go there as a matter of necessity.
Truth.
Yeah.
Questions?
Sorry, I'm the guy who came in late. Okay. Yeah, the echo is funny.
Yes.
Okay, probably.
Yeah.
I was gonna take it low, but yeah. Okay, yeah, that works.
okay.
Can you guys hear? No. Okay.
You have
Yes.
to have it closer
Okay.
to your mouth.
Yeah.
All right. No problem.
That's how it works.
My question is wildly open. My question is wildly open.
Yeah.
I'm a student. I'm a product design student, and at OsloMet. You guys spoke mostly about working within architecture from a auto-ethnographic view. I tried that, but we are strongly discouraged
Yeah.
from working from that perspective. Maybe it might be this specific school, maybe it might be differently in different schools, but they usually, I don't know, the feedback is usually it works on our personal biases, which is where they start from the beginning of the courses. Okay, yeah, balance your biases, whatever you prefer, do not know about, and also what you want to probably know about, and then work outside of that. Find different things outside of that to inspire or even challenge. And then it becomes a bit harder to work autoethnographically when the resources for I'm thinking industrially, but previous industrial history is mostly based on Western production. So how do you... Yeah, I mean, it might open up for a specific affordance where you can do a lot of things, and then it closes up for some things. So how do you work around that? If you have faced those challenges specifically within your studies or fields outside at work?
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question. From my point of view, it's important to understand the basis and the foundation of any skill set that you want to have. It's important to think broadly, but at the same time understand exactly what this is about. Now, working on a piece that you hate is the best way to understand how to challenge your creativity. Because your creativity doesn't rely on you liking something. It's you using a different language to translate it. So yes, you need to understand all the things that you don't want. You need to actually go even much more deeper into the things you don't like. Why don't you like something is important. Why do you dislike that? Why is that an aversion? You need to understand all those things. When you've done all that, you always find your voice, because your voice, like my man said, it's inside you. Yeah. But everything else on the outside, you need to be able to have a discussion and a conversation about it. You know, you can't walk into a room and say, oh, I don't know that because I didn't like that. You should be able to have conversations about things, because that's how you understand how powerful yours is. That's all I have.
Yeah, I can add to that. I was talking about the airplane, right? That how they made that airplane. Like, okay, you have very defined problem of trying to get enough pressure underneath that airplane wing so that you can fly, right? And if you're talking about industrial design, I think you're going to be facing very similar challenges, right? You're designing a product, and you're trying to solve a very specific challenge, right? And so what your task is first and foremost to solve that problem and that challenge in the most efficient way, without regard to anything else. Just go straight for it, and that's their North Star. And I think the ethno design. I remember what the term that
auto-ethnographic.
Auto-ethnographic. I'm going to practice that. Challenge comes in. I think that's going to happen automatically just by the way you are, right? A Japanese friend told me this. He says, if you take a piece of paper and you try to draw a circle, the best way you can, the most perfect circle, it's never going to be perfect. It's going to have a little kink in that circle. That's who you are, that little kink, that's who you are. It's going to happen automatically. So if you do your damn best to try to solve that problem, I don't think you have to think about the
auto-ethnographic.
It will come anyway, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. That's it. Ja.
Hi. So this is a bit of a personal question, but I think hopefully it applies to everyone. I see myself a little bit in both of you. I'm half Ghanaian. I also studied in the States a little bit at Cooper Union.
Cool.
So back to we were touching on bringing influences from other cultures into the European Norwegian context. I find personally it's more of a intuitive, subconscious thing on my end. Whenever I try to force it in, bring it in, it's a little bit like the colors don't work in this context. So I was wondering if you yourselves have more of a conscious approach towards it, or whether it's more of a natural, intuitive thing that happens as you're dealing with functional or aesthetic problems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's, if I understand it correctly, it sounds pretty similar to the question that he had before, right? That how do you get the ideas of like your personal influences into the design? May I ask a follow-up question? What is your, maybe you've said this, but what is your field? Are you architect, designer, or?
Primarily
graphic designer. Okay, yeah. I would say it would be along the same lines of the previous answer, is that I think if you focus first and foremost on the challenge at hand and the specifics of it, then the other parts that is more biographical will come out anyway. But it depends also a little bit on the discipline. If you're doing industrial design, there is a little bit less room, I would imagine. I've never done industrial design, but I would imagine that it's a kind of a challenge and a kind of a field where there's less room for personal expression. But I think there are other disciplines within the creative spectrum that gives more room. I mean, if you're an artist, of course, you can be as personally expressive as you want. Architecture allows a little bit of room, fashion, but I'm not sure if you're a commercial graphic designer, I think that's probably a little bit less on that scale. But in the end, I think it comes out anyway. Just by the virtue of who you are, your background, your experience. Yeah. So.
And I can also add to that because I said I'm not a designer, but I have experience of working with designers. I supervise a lot of design students, quite a few design students. So what I always tell them as a piece of advice is that it's not about excluding or dividing between where the knowledge comes from. It's more about adding to your toolbox of existing sources which you draw inspiration from in order to address the problems that you actually have to face as both personally and as a professional. So it is an advantage to have a more wider like a toolbox of ideas, methods, approaches, and techniques. And this will kind of help you. So it doesn't mean excluding what set of techniques or what you learned in school, but it's also about how do you complement those in order to kind of better face the problems you have. And sometimes those ideas, because of the philosophies behind them, may conflict. But it doesn't mean that you cannot find a way of getting things to talk to each other. And that's when maybe sometimes your background, your bond experience might come in, because it's like maybe your personal experience of living in of having different positions, identity positions, different experiences might actually come in to inform how you think about these things.
Okay, so so usually I would ask myself, is it better to be a Ghanaian designer,
yes,
a Norwegian designer, or is it just best to be a designer?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where this lies in a way. What is a Norwegian designer? What is a German designer? Does Norwegian designer have to work specifically with something from Norway? I think just the fact that you are half Ghanaian, half something else, means you have the ability to be able to create anything as you want, and that wouldn't limit, but actually will give a broader base to what you do, right? It's just you see things much better than most people. You can see two angles, right? But none of those things should define whether you're a great designer or not. Mm-hmm. Do you get me, right? So in a way, your ideas will come through to you in many different forms, many different ways. But just because you are from Ghana doesn't mean your work should only involve that part of you. You can step into any space, you can look at what's around you, you can use your tools on the inside and translate and create work that will fit anywhere. For me, that's the strength of being a designer. And incidentally, you're Ghanaian too. And that's, for me, that's a powerful thing. You know, I design kimonos in Japan, right? I've worked for a company. They've pulled me in 8 years ago, and I designed kimonos for them. They didn't pull me because I was Ghanaian. They pulled me because I was a great tailor and a great designer, right? So my skill set was wanted, and I do that for them. And we create this beautiful thing which has moved on to high heights and even part of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, right? It's not defined as a Ghanaian piece or a Norwegian piece. It's designed as a tea kimono created by a designer who happens to be from XYZ, right? And I think that part is super important. You can bring all your background in and carve it and create it, but don't let anyone, or don't allow yourself to be put in just one box in a way. You know. Yeah. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see if this works.
Hey, look at you.
No worries. No worries. So what I wanted to ask was, how do you guys think that capitalism has affected like architecture in a sense? And I also wonder how does the weather in a sense, or just general geography, affect architecture and how different things are made? And I also wonder how they're also interconnected in a sense. how different areas with like different different weathers, right? And different areas with differing levels of capitalism ingrained within them, right? You see that in like American societies relative to Norwegian societies, how Norwegian societies have more of a social, what's it called, socialism aspects relative to the Americans. And then you'd also see how, if you were to go to like Ghana and these kinds of places, how they would be interconnected in a sense, and also the mass scale productions of different clothings, how that in a sense also shaped our perceptions on how like clothing in a sense, and also general architecture also has evolved.
Okay.
Several questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one is for you.
So along the same lines, I would say, how does the sun affect architecture? How does the weather affect architecture? I think those things are capitalism and architecture. It's totally intertwined. There was an architect, Louis Sullivan, that says form follows function, right? And it became a big, kind of a very famous saying.
Mantra.
And since then, people came along and made different variations on it. I would say architecture, capitalism follows, or architecture follows capitalism, or form. When I say form, it's the design. So design follows function, design follows capitalism, design follows weather, design, it follows everything. So in when you're designing anything, there's all these different components that shape that final thing. When I was in school, there's a big movement called paper architects, where architects were just drawing things, ideas, visionary things that it's not necessarily meant to be built. And I think perhaps architecture like that is perhaps the only one that can escape to some degree capitalism, but I think they're all. You can't escape it. So yeah, that's basically my take on it. But I think there was that's the first thing I heard, and it stuck with me. But I think there was a second component to the question that I didn't.
I think it's the same part, but I think you expanded it.
Yeah, it's expanded it. Yeah. Okay. So well, that's my answer in a nutshell.
What I want to say is I design raincoats, right? And this is called Norwegian Rain, and for me that's the best raincoat in the world. Have you heard? Yeah. Or because we live in Bergen and it rains 2 out of 3 days, so we make great raincoats, you know. But the point of the raincoat, it's the reason why we wanted to design it was actually, since it rains 2 out of 3 days, you will protect yourself for those 2 days, right, with any rubbish thing you find, because no one likes rain, kind of thing. People just cover themselves. But the idea was to create the raincoat so you can wear it on the 3rd day when it wasn't raining. So practically you sort it for the 2 first ones. It doesn't look like a raincoat. The function is the most important thing here, right? And again, you can say form follows function, but in a way, the form decided how the raincoat will look, and then eventually we camouflage everything into tailoring. So, yes, the weather dictates, and, you know, capitalism runs the system as much as we try and grab ourselves away from it, right? And now we have a special concept that we're working on called the compact stores. Compact store is a very sort of a new modern way of doing fashion retailing. It takes away producing so much in so many different colors and hoping that in 6 months someone will buy that color, right? Now we produce the base that most people will buy, and the special colors, the fuchsia, the purple, and all the crazy ones, when you want it, we'll do it for you, and it takes 6 weeks, bam, it's yours. So practically we combat overproduction. We combat, practically there's 27% of every garment that is made never actually reaches the store. Think about that, 27. That goes right to the bin. On top of that, the ones that reaches the store sometimes ends up in the bin as well.
Yeah.
Right, it's a massive number. So by doing this, we take away the risks of thinking ahead. We create beautiful products, obviously, but we don't have to create, because the cool colors in the window draws people in. So we need to have that. But now we can put in the window, but we don't have to have a series of them. We make it for you, right? So we eliminate all these things. We don't have to have a huge warehouse. And then also the ones that we would sell, we produce more of that to get a better pricing on that, so the prices don't go too high. So it's a nice way of mixing digital shopping and brick and mortar store kind of thing, So a fine balance of thing. When COVID came in, we were selling to about 110 stores in the world, right? From Harvey Nichols to Harrods and Beams and all these other stores. But then, within the same week, all these stores shut down, right? So they realized that your business plan, it's not all that, right? So you need to rethink things. So we started looking at the numbers of the clothing that we actually sold through the stores, and then compare that to the clothing that we sold in our own stores and see which one was more beneficial.
Yeah.
Now, we realized that if we sold one garment in every store every week, we have 4 stores, it would equal all the 110 stores. And there's a lot of running around as well. There's a lot of running around to trade shows, and sometimes you do 5 trade shows in a season. So the more we started thinking that, we started questioning everything about what we did. Why do we open a store at 9 o'clock? Who comes in at 9 o'clock to buy anything? Small little things that doesn't mean much, but when you start questioning everything, you realize that you can actually compress everything into one small little package. Because if someone wants something, they will come back. It's not that spur of the moment kind of sales, These things are pricey, so you take your time, you think about it, you save, and then you buy them. So we took away all the things that we felt were not giving us anything. We needed to lower our costs, we need to maximize our reach, and then hopefully we'll have a system where this will work generally for us without having the waste as well. So we started working on this, and then we've done a few tests with different places. Now we have 3 compact stores. One is at the Kunstsilo in Kristiansand, the museum. We tested out in hotels. We tested out in different places just to see how the reaction is. Because what you do is you come in, you scan the QR code, you see what the garment looks like, you see the color, and then you order it. We deliver it to your door after 2 days. And if we don't have it, we'll make it for you. So, yes, I get the concept of all these, we need to run and get the money, but sometimes we can also reboot and go back to that tailoring aspect of making clothing. And this has worked very well. And next week, I'm going to Japan tomorrow, and next week we're launching in 4 stores in Japan. Yeah.
So this is our last question of the evening. Patrick, please.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So I was scrolling to my LinkedIn, and then I saw this amazing woman called Grace running the company Grace Ucha AS, and she's also a fashion designer. And the caption of her post was, "Fashion is not superficial, it is psychological safety." And then I was thinking of, do you believe in the concept of cultural appropriation, like you two? Because while hearing you talking, I was a bit confused. So I just want to know, what's your take on that? And that also reminds me of Brother Fuad talking, because do you believe that your struggles during your studies is the same as the struggles that we are facing now? So, yeah.
Good question. Yeah. Take that.
Yeah. That's a fine last question.
Yes.
Yeah. let me jump on this very, very quickly. I think we should be able to differentiate between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. These are two different things, right? Now, how to differentiate that is not very straightforward. But I think you all know that when you see someone trying to create something, a mediocre version of something, to take in lots of money, is not really appreciating anything. It's a way to create a product to make more money from it. I know the difference because I think you can always tell when something is made well. You can tell the love that goes into a product. You can tell how many rounds that person has gone to decide to make that product, right? But I'll leave it to each and everyone to make that decision on these things because it's a personal kind of thing, you know. But the second part, that I know for sure is not the same. I know it's not the same because when I was in tailoring school, there was less distractions. There was a certain way of approaching things, and there was just that one way, right? This is like 29 years ago or 30 years ago, right? Now there's so many distractions, and what everyone has to go through is totally different from what I go through. I have 2 kids. My daughter's 36. My son is 29. Now, I know what they go through is different from what I went through. And the reason why I say that is that there are so many. There's one thing that I used to say, that when your kid comes home after they've gone out, instead of being angry they came home late, you should be grateful they came home, right? Because there's so many offers going on, there's so many things going on there, and they could choose not to. But they chose to come back home, and that is what should be applauded. I think the best way to go around this is for you to do a lot of reading, a lot of research, and see the different approaches from different people. What I'll tell you is not what he would tell you or she would tell you. But I know for a fact that deep inside anyone that's in here or anywhere else, there's a certain drive that is there, right? And that drive doesn't come from someone says, do this, right? That comes because you actually want to do that thing. Whether people around you appreciate it or not, that's a whole different story, right? But if you gauge well and you think slightly ahead in the future and you forget other people's plan, that's what you should be listening to. And then you go through that motion, that slow motion. You might make a lot of mistakes, and that mistake is fine too, because that tunes you, that forms you, that gives you a little bit of that understanding of what you've learned and how far you've come and how far you can go as well. So it's a non-answer in a way, but that's how I look at things. You just have to find what's right for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Yes? You have final.
I am here to say thank you to you, Henry, to Don, and to T. Michael, and to all of you who came out to this event, and to the people who are watching, wherever they're watching. And I also want to encourage you to go into the Black History Month Norway website and look at the rest of our program. This is the first of 3 Diaspora Dialogues. The next one is on the 23rd, and that will be moderated by Patrick, and that one will feature young voices. Younger voices, I'm sorry, excuse me, pardon me. Younger voices, and then our third Diaspora Dialogue is on the 30th, and that will be moderated by Eunice, and it is another collaboration with My African Aesthetic. I also want to highlight that on Saturday at the Norske Teatret, we are celebrating Queendom and the 20th anniversary of their show, their production called Integrert som Fan, which was launched in the fall of 2005. And the last commercial that I will do is that on the 16th here at Centralen, we are welcoming professor, illustrator, and writer Joel Christian Gill, who is an illustrator of graphic novels about Black history. And his latest book is a collaboration called Stamped from the Beginning. The book was written by Professor Ibrahim X. Kendi, and it is now, he has done the illustrated version, and it is also the basis or the point of departure for the Netflix documentary, Stamped from the Beginning. So you can go and take a look at that. And Professor Gill leads the MA program in visual narratives at Boston University, and he will be here with us on the 16th of October. So please take a look at our program, and thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for being here. It's a dream come true. Is that too big and bombastic to say? It is, though. So thank you so much for being here this evening. Let's give them a hand, please.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Black History Month Norway team, to Lynn, our event manager tonight, to our wonderful volunteers, and to the whole team. So thank you. Thank you for coming, and have a safe evening home. Yes.
Thank you.